I now invite the President and Vice-Chancellor, Professor Margaret Gardner, to present a candidate for the degree of Doctor of Laws, honoris causa.
Chancellor, Emeritus Professor Peter Lee is an engineer and a university leader whose contributions in the fields of chemical education and of higher education have been highly significant in Australia. Professor Lee is a Monash alumnus with the Doctor of Philosophy in Chemical Engineering. He recently retired as the 4th Vice-Chancellor of Southern Cross University, and prior to that appointment served in leadership roles at the University of South Australia, where he was Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Vice-President Academic from 2006 to 2009, as well as the University of Queensland, Murdoch University and Curtin University. Professor Lee is recognised internationally as an authority in the field of process control engineering. He's the author of several books, as well as more than 270 journal papers. He is a Fellow of the Australian Academy of Technological Sciences and Engineering and of Engineers Australia, and has been named as one of the 100 most influential engineers by Engineers Australia. For his service to the chemical and general engineering industries, Professor Lee was awarded a Centenary Medal in 2001. Peter has served on a wide variety of corporate, university, research and government boards. I want to just mention one. He's provided invaluable contributions to higher education through his role with the peak representative body for higher education, Universities Australia. With Universities Australia, he served on the board and as chair of the Finance, Audit and Risk Committee for several years. He was also the lead Vice-Chancellor, Indigenous Higher Education, and at another time the lead Vice-Chancellor for Corporate Services. He was also Director on the Board of Universities Australia's subsidiary. Professor Lee co-founded the Regional Universities Network, which is a coalition of 6 Australian universities to provide a stronger focus to advocacy to the Australian Government for the regions in relation to higher education. He served as the chair of the Regional Universities Network for 2 years until 2015. Professor Lee also was instrumental in the establishment of the engineering program at Southern Cross University and at Murdoch University, where he introduced a series of new engineering programs across a range of fields, from instrumentation and control through renewable energy and software engineering. He was formerly a member of the Defence Reserve Support Council, responsible for promoting the work of the Defence Reserves to employers and to the Australian community. He's engaged in many fields today since he has stopped being a Vice-Chancellor, but among others he provides services to government and non-government agencies, including the United Nations Development Organisation. Chancellor, it gives me the very greatest pleasure to present to you for admission to the degree of Doctor of Laws, honoris causa, Peter Leslie Lee.
With the authority of Council, I admit you, Peter Leslie Lee, to the degree of Doctor of Laws, honoris causa. I now have much pleasure in inviting Emeritus Professor Lee to deliver our graduation address today.
Chancellor Mr Simon McKeon, President and Vice-Chancellor Professor Margaret Gardner, Dean of the Faculty of Engineering Professor Elizabeth Croft, members of the faculty, parents and friends of the graduates, ladies and gentlemen, and especially our new graduates. My heartiest congratulations go to all of you. This is an important day in your life as it ends one chapter but begins another. It's taken hard work and dedication to achieve the award you have received today. Celebrate this with pride. Of course, you haven't achieved this all on your own. Your parents and partners and friends have assisted you along the way, and they share in equal pride in the achievements acknowledged in the awarding of your degree. Their names should be in small print on the testaments you have received. I'm deeply honoured and grateful to have received this honorary degree today from my alma mater. It's now over 40 years since I began my study here at Monash, giving me the basis for my future engineering and academic career. It's also a great pleasure to be back in the Robert Blackwood Hall after so many years since my own graduation and even since my son's graduation. It brings back many fond memories of my time on this campus. But my association with Clayton goes back even longer. The new university in Melbourne was a place to come on Sunday afternoon drives, and my parents took me here when the Menzies wing, then known as the Ming wing, was being constructed. And some of my school excursions were taken to the Alexander Theatre for productions of various plays, inflicting Shakespeare and others on a young schoolboy who didn't perhaps appreciate what was being delivered. I often reflect on the words of that great Australian, General Sir John Monash, for whom this university is named, a former Vice-Chancellor of the University of Melbourne, head of the State Electricity Commission of Victoria, founder of the Anzac Day Parade, and most importantly, a great civil engineer. The privilege of education carries great responsibilities. It is given not for individual benefit alone, but to befit persons for the higher duties of citizenship and for roles of leadership in all fields. So today, for the next 2 hours or so, I want to reflect on intellectual rigour and what is emerging as a post-fact society. Rigour, of course, has a connotation of stretching beyond the routine. Think of rigorous physical training that aims to develop the fitness of an individual. So it is with intellectual rigour, stretching the mind to think in new ways to develop a higher level of mental capacity. Great universities like Monash embrace diversity of thought, intellectual rigour, and discourse. Of course, at times this has not led to an easy relationship between universities and broader society. Oxford built walls to protect its staff and students from the citizens. Our universities in Australia are under constant attack from various parts of the media. Graduate attributes at Monash, which all courses embed, include the creation of critical and creative scholars. This cannot be achieved without intellectual rigour and ensures that graduates are able to argue and reason from an appropriate intellectual base. So what is intellectual rigour? A mathematician and an engineer are standing together, and 2 metres away is the most desirable thing they both want. They can step towards it, providing that each step they take only takes them halfway from where they are to their goal at any given time. The engineer immediately begins to step towards the object. The mathematician cries, "You idiot! Don't you know you can never get there?" The engineer calls back along the way, "Yes, I know, but I can get close enough for all practical purposes." Intellectual or academic are not necessarily terms of endearment in Australia and are often used to deride an argument being put forward. Too often we undervalue the rigour of an argument that is capable of being expressed by today's graduates. We can name the previous two captains of the Australian cricket side, although that's a bit of a challenge, Payne and Smith, but how many of us could name any of the 15 Australians who have won a Nobel Prize, or indeed the last two, Schmidt and Blackburn? But of course, academic study does have some value. Try some of these questions. How long did the 100 Years' War last? 116 years, from 1337 to 1453. From which animal do we get catgut? From sheep and horses. In which month do Russians celebrate the October Revolution? November. The Russian calendar was 13 days behind ours. How long did the 30 Years' War last? 30 years, of course. From 1618 to 1648. You expected something else? For the past 300 years, since the Age of Enlightenment, championed by Spinoza and Locke, there's been a cultural movement emphasising reason and individualism rather than tradition. Its purpose was to reform society using reason, challenge ideas grounded in tradition and faith, and advance knowledge through the scientific method. It promoted scientific thought, skepticism, and intellectual interchange. It opposed superstition and intolerance, with the church as a favourite target. The ideas of the Enlightenment have had a major impact on the culture, politics, and government of the Western world, and represent the basis for modern ideas of liberalism against intolerance and superstition. More than ever before, this tradition is under attack. We've seen the case of an Australian senator assert something is true because he believed it to be so. We've seen the rise of the notion of alternative facts, even if these facts don't fit any known evidence that can be produced. How many people really did attend President Trump's inauguration? And we've seen the rise of antagonism against the expert and specialist, where every opinion in the Twitter sphere is given equal weight despite the evidence. The anti-vaccination lobby is but one prime example of this utter nonsense. As you move into your professional careers, you will be required to convince many people of the value of your own ideas. Presenting rigorous cases to persuade others is always more than gathering good evidence, as important as that is in and of itself. The gathering of evidence is often the easy but time-consuming part of preparing an argument. Asking, "So what does this tell me?" is the intellectually stimulating part. It is often the logic of your argument and the language you use to express it that will make the difference. And being explicit about assumptions is the most challenging component of expressing an argument. So many of the assumptions we make in life are implicit and culturally derived. In the real world, culturally derived implicit assumptions can be much more subtle and harder to detect. Often we ascribe these assumptions without really thinking about them. Think about turn back the boats issue and how both language and implicit assumptions have been used to create an environment for the solutions proffered through both the mass media and our parliament. Think of the climate change debate and the implicit assumptions used to justify two contrasting approaches to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Even though the evidence that the climate is changing is now virtually unchallenged, that the evidence is agreed, but assumptions lead to different outcomes. As Ed Morrow would have it, our major obligation is not to mistake slogans for solutions. Listing our inherent biases and prejudices is neither easy nor pleasant work as we hold the mirror to ourselves. We do not usually make all assumptions explicit. There are simply too many to articulate. This being the case, communication of rigorous arguments requires that there an understanding exist between speaker and listener in the form of a body of common assumptions. But it's this very absence of this understanding between speaker and listener that creates difficulties in culturally loaded arguments. All too often, the implicit assumptions are just plain overlooked. So consider this exchange at a local hardware store between an electrical engineer and a store assistant. Electrical engineer: do you have any 2-watt, 4-volt light bulbs? Assistant: for what? Electrical engineer: no, 2. Assistant: 2-watt? Electrical engineer: yes. Assistant: nah. In my own engineering career, I once had to ask a worker to dismantle, clean and reassemble a large number of valves all by hand, a very repetitive and time-consuming task. I thought this was a very unpleasant task to ask anyone to do, and agonise over asking the worker to do it. I eventually did so and checked on the worker a few days later. I asked him how he was getting on, and to my amazement, he replied, "Just great. No one worries me doing this task. I work at my own pace, and everyone respects what I'm doing." So, do not impose your own needs and ambitions on other people who may not share them. Don't assume things that motivate you will motivate someone else. Recognise that the sources of happiness may vary widely between people. One sign of intellectual maturity is the ability to accept an intellectual challenge without interpreting it as a personal affront. And here lies the challenge for you all today: not to take offence when the argument you are presenting is not universally applauded with acclaim, or where the argument you put forward by another is unpleasant to your ears. Stop and think about the underlying and implicit assumptions before leaping to inappropriate conclusions. Challenge yourself to not only look at the evidence, but at the logic of what is presented. Look for those implicit and underlying assumptions, or as the old saw has it, walk a mile in my shoes. Because this is what we mean when we say intellectual rigour. Graduates, as you leave Monash University, reflect on the life and contribution made by General Sir John Monash, and recall 2 other quotations from him for further guidance. Firstly, if you do follow any of what I have offered in this challenge to you, then as Monash has it in the expression of his age, no man is a hero in his own country. And yet, despite this warning to those who speak out, Monash always saw that education was key to this nation's future, the future to which you will now be expected to contribute. In his words, the best hope for Australia is the ballot box and good education. I would like then to end with a traditional Irish blessing. Graduates, may your past be a pleasant memory, your future filled with delight and mystery, your now a glorious moment that fills your life with deep contentment. Thank you, congratulations to you all, and good luck.